Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, as you know, this is an event presented by the Jewish Academy. The Jewish Academy, as you know, is the newly launched, highly professional and innovative program providing top quality education for adults of all backgrounds. This program is co-sponsored tonight by the Jewish Learning Institute from Chabad of Richmond. It's also co-sponsored by a wonderful organization here in Vancouver, the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center. As well, I'd like to welcome the president of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, Mr. Ed Lewin, and I'd like to invite them to light a candle in the memory of the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust. I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, which I had the privilege to meet just moments ago. Joanne Caras is the star of a weekly cooking show on Monday nights called Miracles and Meals. The show appears on Monday evening at 9 p.m. on JLTV all over the United States and in 116 countries. For the past several years, Joanne has worked tirelessly to create and promote the Holocaust Survivor Cookbook. After collecting 129 stories and over 250 recipes from Holocaust survivors from all over the world, she has appeared on Fox TV, CBS, NBC, ABC, Israeli national TV, and national radio in the US, Canada, and Israel. Joanne has given over 250 speeches all across the world, including Canada, Mexico, England, Israel, Denmark, Switzerland, and Italy. Her second book, Miracles and Meals, contains 115 new stories and over 200 more recipes. Joanne and her husband, Harvey, have been married for 30 years. They live in Florida. The couple donates all of the profits from every cookbook sold to Jewish charities. Their largest donations have gone to the Karmei Ear Soup Kitchen in Jerusalem, which feeds over 500 hungry Israelis every day. Her son Jonathan, her daughter-in-law Sarah, her granddaughter Zava, and grandson Shalom live in Jerusalem. Her son Michael is a Chabad rabbi who lives in New York with his wife Leah and their daughter Chaya. And her daughter Rachel lives in St. Louis with her husband Dan. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Joanne Caras.
Malky, I want to thank you. I think you're all the way in the back there for making my dream come true, to bring me here, and I certainly appreciate it. I want to also thank those who took part in making this evening event, the Holocaust Museum, those who did the cooking. But I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening, giving me a chance to tell you my story. The story of a woman's trip to Israel would turn out to create two books, the Holocaust Survivor Cookbook and our new book, Miracles and Meals, and would have her own TV show. You are part of my 90-city world-speaking tour this year. Thank you for letting me tell you my story. Do you know, as I travel all over the world, people ask me, how did this happen to you? How is it that this woman who never wrote a book before would end up with the #1 book at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. and have a World Mitzvah project? So let me take you back to where it all started. It was 1982. I met and married my adorable husband, Harvey. And shortly after marrying him, we realized that I was pregnant. And he said, let's fly to Boston to share the fabulous news with my family. And when we got there, he said, my Zadie, who's in a nursing home, has been expecting us. He can't wait for you to tell him. And as I told Zadie that I was pregnant and that he would be having another great-grandchild, Zadie would tell me something that would stick with me my whole entire life. He said, when I was 17, I lived in Russia, and the Russian army was coming, and they were taking the young Jewish boys. And my mother, at 17, put me on a boat to America. Little did this mother know that he would be the only one to survive. 60 family members of my husband's family were killed at Babi Yar. And here I was pregnant, and I'm thinking of this mother that had given her child up, put him on a boat, and he would be the only living legacy of their family. And I made a promise to Zadie then and there that my children and I would always remember those that were lost and those that were able to survive. So now let me take you up to 2005. That young baby that was inside, his name was Jonathan. He was getting married to his beautiful wife, Sarah. And off they would go with backpacks to Israel as they were making Aliyah, 7 days after being married. So my husband and I gave him some money, and I said to him, I'll see you during Passover. I wanted them to have a chance to get into school, to learn the language. And as I went over to visit him, you remember that first trip on the Israeli soil. You never know what could happen. My son would take me to the Wailing Wall. He would take me to the Old City. He would even take me to the Dead Sea, where we floated. But it wasn't until we walked into this diner that my life purpose, my life would change in an instant. We walk in this diner. They come, they tell us what the menu is, and as they walk away, my son says to me, this is a soup kitchen where Sarah and I are volunteering. I looked around. There were soldiers, and you know Israel, that means men and women. There were businessmen. There were children with their mothers. And I said to my son, this isn't a soup kitchen. This is just a diner like we've been in every other day. And my son said, no, this is a soup kitchen and everybody is treated with dignity. And I said to my son, I whispered, why are we eating here? And he said, we eat together and we're going to leave tzedakah at the door. Well, you would have been like me. That little bit of tzedakah is not feeding all of these people. And what would you have done just as I did? Inquired. Well, the rabbi, you know the rabbi always comes down with the answers. And the Rabbi Yehuda came down and he told me they fed 500 poor and hungry Israelis every single day through their program. Through the diner, through the school program, into resident homes. Every single day. And I was touched to my core. My hair stood up on edge. And I turned around and I looked at my son, who was just starting his life in Israel. And I said to him, when I get back home, I want our family to do a project that would raise money for your soup kitchen. I come back home and I call my son, what happened to me? He said, I knew you'd be touched. That's why I took you there. I said to him, I'm going to be true to my word. I'm going to do a project to raise money. I don't have an idea. And my son had remembered I had made 2 small little cookbooks. One with their shul, they were all wobbly, little spine, and another one for underprivileged children. We made a total of $5,000 each. And I'm thinking, there was more of a fun women's project to do, pulling women's recipes together. And I said, I don't know if that's a great idea. But shortly after that, my daughter-in-law, Sarah's bubby died. And she sent a beautiful card. It was a picture of a young girl with her mother. And she said, "This is my mother, Gazella, and that's my bubby. My bubby was the only survivor in her family. She loved her family." And do you know, my idea would go back to the promise that I had made Zadie all those years ago. And I said to my children, how about if we do a story collecting Holocaust survivors' stories and their family recipes? At that moment, the Holocaust Survivor Cookbook was born. Do you know, all of my children agreed. They said, we will come on board with you with this project, and I'm very proud to stand here and tell you today, every one of my children still works on this project. But like any project you're going to do, what does it take? It takes goals. So I said, how about if we start out 100 stories, but they must be from every continent in the world, and 200 recipes. Now, we lived in Maryland, so the obvious place to start would be our Holocaust Museum. I asked them to send it in their newsletter, please, anybody that was interested in giving us their story and their recipe. And then my husband wrote to Jewish publications, anything with the name Jewish on it, Jewish Time, Jewish Journal. We sent out and asked them to please ask a survivor to participate. And in Israel, even Hadassah did a little blurb in their magazine as they interviewed my daughter-in-law. 6 months, every single day, I worked on this project. How many stories do you think came to me? This is where I need you to participate. And they have all over the world, so I went Vancouver also to be, you're thinking inside, just how many do you think that I would receive?
800,000.
I want you to see this. Not one story came. And I was passionate about what I was doing. And I said to my mother, I must have made a mistake. This is the wrong project. My mother lived with us. And my mother said, Joanne, you know in your heart what you're doing. You're passionate about it. You're going to get not one story but 2. And you're going to finish this book. Well, my mother lived with us and did all of the cooking. And we never argued. So being that good daughter, I just kept working at it and working at it. We would go, somebody would tell me they had a survivor. And eventually, people started letting us into their homes. And we would sit down with them like you are going to when you take this book home with a tissue as you read their stories. But eventually, over the next 2 years, we were able to get stories, 129. Now remember I told you I didn't want it 100, but I couldn't get South America. We sent it into their newspapers, into their magazine, translated in Spanish. Eventually, by the time it came, we had 129 stories, 250 recipes, but they came from Israel, South Africa, Europe, Asia, South America, Australia, Canada, and over 20 U.S. states. But now our children have left us. We're leaving Maryland. We're moving to Florida. And I get a call from a lady. It sounds something like this. Joanne, I'm calling you from New Zealand. I heard there's a woman in the States collecting stories and recipes from Holocaust survivors. I said, excuse me, where did you say you're calling from? New Zealand? Well, I knew this. If I was in Florida at 4 o'clock, she was calling me very early or very, very late. But our message had traveled to the other side of the world. And the front cover of our book, that challah, that is her family's recipe. Her husband would be saved because they owned the bakery when the Nazis came in and they needed him to work. And I know you'll enjoy that story. Do you know my husband and I went on touring as we decided this was the way to give you this message of our beautiful World Mitzvah Project. We had no intentions of doing a second book. I told you I had 90 speaking engagements. We were doing about 50 each year at that point. But I was in Canada. On the other side of Canada, I was actually in Montreal. And I was signing books, and after I finished, she said, I want to introduce you to my bubby. My bubby is here. She has never told her story to anyone. And I was hoping that if she heard you and about this project, she would share her story with her children, her grandchildren, so we would know. And I took the woman's hand, and I sat down next to her. And she would tell me her story. She would tell her granddaughter. I cried. She cried. Her granddaughter cried. I got back into the car and my husband said to me, what's going to be the name of your second book? And so I thought, you know, we've got it down. It won't take us so long. 2 years again, collecting the stories from all over the world. And our new book would be Miracles and Meals. And I'm telling you, the stories are just as powerful. We got stories from places we had never been able to reach. Cuba, Iceland, the first Jewish woman to arrive because they were looking for a seamstress. She would marry a Christian man there, but she would have the first bar mitzvah as she had a son. A story from Scotland, Venezuela, places the first book had never been able to reach. Our 2 cookbooks are a beautiful collection of 244 miracles. Rachel Chasen from Israel would tell us this. She was in Auschwitz, but she could go to labor camp. And in the morning, they would have a 10-minute break. And they would lay on the dirt. They wouldn't get food and coffee, but they would talk about their home cooking. And she said, we would talk about, as the guards walked away loudly, always with a vivid imagination, when it was my turn to tell of my recipe that I yearned for. It was stuffed cabbage. I would pick the greenest head of cabbage, placing it into the boiling water until the leaves would just soften, taking them out, gently pulling them apart, rolling and filling them with meat, rice, spices, and onion until they're a little envelope, taking that, placing into the next pot with just a little bit of oil so that it won't stick, making tomato sauce, using real tomatoes. That is my secret. The whistle would blow, the break was over. That recipe never touched their mouths. But yet somehow it nourished not just their tummies, it nourished their souls. The rabbi kind of hit on my next story, but I want to tell it in my own words. Ruth Steinfeld was so young when her mother was taken away by the Nazis. She said, they didn't just steal my mother, but they stole a vision of my mother in my mind's eye because I was too young. She said, do you know, I don't know the color of my mother's eyes. I'll never remember her hair. I'll never be able to see her smile. I know a smile that she had for me when I was a child. But I survived. I grew up without a mother. So it was important for me to not just be a good mother, a good Jewish mother, and that meant cooking. And so she would make this chicken soup with a little of this and a little of that. An interesting thing would happen to her. You know this is true. You come across the scent of something is different from your eye scent. And when that hit her nose, as she made that chicken soup, it would bring her mother's presence into the kitchen with her. And she would make this soup over and over again for her children and her grandchildren because she wanted them to also feel that wonderful presence that she could of her mother in that kitchen. And she wanted to remind us all, you know, as we make these foods, we think we're connecting to our future generation. But she wanted you to remember how these foods connect us all to our past. I want to tell you about another Ruth. It comes from her daughter, where she tells us the story of Ruth Gansmeyer. The daughter's name is Desiree Kate from Ohio. She said to me, my mother was in Auschwitz, and they would have roll call. 5 would line up at a time for uphall. And that day, they chose who would live and who would die. And on this day, Ruth was called, and she knew that this would be her last day on earth. She was reminded of that by the smoke in the sky. And her mother stood behind her, and she begged him, please, please don't take my daughter. She's strong. I'm old. Please, take me. Take me. Do you know, that was a cry and a plea from many of mothers. But this was the miracle. They would allow them to trade places so Ruth's mother would take her place. There wouldn't be hugs and kisses goodbye. Only in that black smoke in the sky did she get to truly thank her mother and promise her that she would survive. Now, what kind of woman do you think that Ruth would become? She could have been a bitter woman. We would have understood that. But do you know, just as we heard today from that young boy who talked about his bubby, this was a woman who reminded her family by having wonderful sweet treats in her oven. If you came in, her friends, her children, her grandchildren, there was always something sweet coming out of that oven to remind them of their blessings each day in their life. And I ask you, make that recipe and be reminded, just as she did with her own family. This next story comes to us from Brawny First of Linden, New Jersey. It is an amazing story. Do you know, when we think about wars, we think about soldiers against soldiers. But this was a war of infants, of Zadies, of bubbies, of mothers, of children. This was a war a different kind. Young Brawny First, at 9 years old, would go to the first camp with her father, her mother, her brother, and she would be the 4th one in that family. At the first camp, her father is shot. She doesn't know if he's just hurt or he will survive. But she is separated at 9 years old from her mother and her father and her baby brother. She would survive through 4 camps. And afterwards, it's liberated. There's no one to come for her. They put her in an orphanage with nuns. And one day, a Jewish father, after the war is over, and he's looking for his own daughter, arrives at this orphanage where Brawny is. And he gives a description of his daughter. She should be about 13 now, and she was from this town. And they bring Brawny out to see him. In an instant, she knows it's not her father. But she is so quick-witted. The same quick-wit that she would survive in that camp, she would use that day, and she said to him, please, in Yiddish, take me out of here so I can get back to my own family. Maybe there's somebody there. And do you know, this father does exactly that. He tells the nun, this is my daughter. He embraces her. He takes her out. He takes her to the train station and gives his blessing that she should find her family as he continues his own search. Bronia never sees this man again in her life. She rides that train for 2 weeks from Ukraine to Poland. And when she arrives in that little town where she was from, remember, she was 9 years old, a little child when she left. She's trying to think, well, where was it that we lived? Oh, I remember that we lived near a Jewish market because my mother would take me before Shabbos to go get food. So if I ask somebody, they're going to know. So she gets out and she walks down the street and she asks the woman, please, where is the Jewish market? And the woman goes, oh, nothing survived after the war. And Bronia cried because now where would she find her family? But the woman said to her, what is your family's name? Your last name. And Bronia told the woman. And the woman said, I think you have an aunt that survived. As people came back, they posted in each little village who had survived, who they were looking for. She said, it's dark now. Let me take you home. I'm going to bathe you. I'll feed you. Tomorrow I'll go and I'll bring the aunt. Just as the woman had promised, she took her home. She fed her. She bathed her. The next morning she went out to get the aunt. No, it wasn't her aunt. It was her mother. And her brother had survived too. Well, I want to tell you this next story because it truly is a miracle. It takes both of our books, for you to see the miracle that happened. Sherry Rosenstein, as an infant, is put right into an orphanage by her parents. Never can remember, not one picture in her mind, as she was just too young. The war is over, her parents had been killed, and no one was to come back. But she's in France, and a foster mother goes into this orphanage and takes Bronia out. And there are 13 children in one room. But she picks her out and brings her home to live with her, Mrs. Haynes. And Mrs. Haynes has a little girl who's 5, just like Bronia. And she thinks she's got a little sister and just share her room and her clothes. But Sherry doesn't know that she's going to stay with this woman just until she has the opportunity to get a visa and a passport, as Sherry was chosen from a program in the United States called Operation America, where young Jewish couples were adopting these orphans. But Mrs. Haynes couldn't get the visa and the passport. She was afraid Sherry's going to lose her opportunity to be adopted. So what she does is she dyes Sherry's hair blonde and uses Monique, her little girl that's 5, her passport and her visa. And Mrs. Haynes flies over to Dayton, Ohio, and stays for a whole week because Sherry only speaks French, and says to her, this is where you're going to stay. This is your new mother and your father. They will love you and take care of you forever. And Sherry does tell us that is the truth. She has a beautiful life. She marries her high school sweetheart, has 2 children. But the last line in our book is, I wonder about my parents. I wonder about that woman, Mrs. Haynes, that would take me out of the orphanage. And I wonder about that little girl, Monique, who I shared her room and played with her toys. She was like a sister to me, whatever happened to them. 2010, in Brooklyn, there's a Jewish Children's Museum right there in Crown Heights. A French couple comes out of that museum and they're lost. A rabbi, who's actually, I think he was from Montreal, he speaks French and introduces himself, you know, let me tell you where you're going. But she says to him, Rabbi, when I was a little girl, my mother used my passport to bring a young girl who was in an orphanage to the United States, and I've looked for her my whole entire life. That smart rabbi, as they always are, would Google, and he would find, as I spoke at Dayton, Ohio, with Sherry, as she was in the audience, and they did her story in the newspaper, and she was in our book, he Googled and he found her. So this rabbi called her, and he said, do you know a Monique? Not only did they connect them by phone, they got the money to reunite them. And in our new book, Miracles and Meals, 62 years later, they're brought together. What an incredible miracle. Do you know, we have a story of a woman actually from Toronto. Shulman, what's her first name? Faye Shulman, a partisan. When they said they didn't fight back, a young woman. We have a picture of her in the woods, in the snow with her gun. Her incredible story, and a phenomenal photographer. We have the story of a young girl who would be saved from South Africa because she could play the violin. We have another one who could sew who would be saved. And we have the miracle of a baby born in Shanghai. And as she says, like many other things today, I was made in China. I have a story that takes both of our books. It starts from his name is Solomon Zouder, and he's from Brazil. He was 20 years old, and he was walking for 2 weeks in the snow on what we know now was called the Death March. And as he's marching down, he hears the cry of this little boy who's looking up to the heavens, and he's begging, please, please, please take me out, get me up, I'm too weak, I can't die here, and if the Nazis should see me, I'll be shot. Well, that little boy David in the snow was just 10. He had been with his father, and he was killed before they started the march. But the father made him make a promise on his last bit of his breath that he would go to the United States and live with his uncle, that he would do something good in the world, but he would have the strength to tell of this atrocity that never should have happened. So now as he laid in the snow, how could he just surrender? Well, as Solomon went down and bent down to pick up that little boy with pleading words, as he lifted him, their eyes met, and they were brothers. It took both of our books to get that story out. And do you know, he carried him the rest of the way until the Russians and the Americans came in. When they say, he ain't heavy, he's my brother, that is who they're talking about. I have one last story, and it's a quote, so I'm going to go back so I can share it with you. It's from a woman from South Africa, and her name is Ella Blumenthal. She and her niece are placed in a cattle cart. And there were cattle carts where they had no chance of surviving. Then when they got out, they went right to the gas chamber. And this was one of those cattle carts. But it was an aunt and her niece. And the aunt was trying to console her little niece as they were put into the gas chamber. The door was sealed closed as the poisonous gas was to come from the shower heads. And she promised her little niece, "Don't cry, I'll hold you, it won't hurt. We're going to be with our loved ones now." There were those in prayer, "Shema Yisrael." And instead of the poisonous gas coming out, there was light as the seal on that door opened. And the SS guard came in and said, "My order was to kill 500 Jews today, not 700. And those 200 mothers and children, aunts and nieces, walked out. Miraculously, that miracle spared them. Sadly, the next day, they watched those that were marched into that gas chamber. And she asked me to read this message to you. I am one of the last of a generation of eyewitnesses. In my twilight days, I'm pouring out my story to you. Now it is time when we, the survivors, must entrust our painful legacy to the youth. It is you who will carry out our testimony in the future and ensure that the voices of those that deny this atrocity will be silenced. And while these amazing stories are the heart of our cookbook, I can't overlook the wonderful recipes we have received. Most of them are old family recipes, and many would have been lost forever had the survivor perished. We have over 250 recipes in each book. It just turned out that way. We have recipes for appetizers, main dishes, side dishes, soups, cookles, desserts, and even a section for holiday. I know you're going to get a chance to try some of these delicious desserts that we have here this evening. Now, each recipe, we put it in exactly how it was given. We only made sure that it was kosher for a kosher kitchen. That's all we did. Now, some of these recipes are very detailed in their ingredients and preparation instructions, like gefilte fish, put the whole fish in the bathtub. Others would simply say, a little this, a little that, a bissel this, and a bissel that. And so you might say, how is it that this woman could have a cookbook without all of the ingredients? But we knew that you could get any recipe today from your favorite cookbook. It was more important to give it to you exactly how it was handed down from bubbies to their grandchildren, from mothers to daughters. That's how they were given, and we gave them to you. Edith Klein-Smith from London, England, in her recipe for cucumber salad wrote the following instructions. Take 1 husband to peel and slice the cucumber very thin by hand, as no Jewish princess should do this. And she told me I had to write that in the cookbook. She also gave me a recipe for calf brains, which I haven't tried yet, and I don't think I ever will. But I heard many people say they were delicious. Donna Bell of Montreal, Canada, when she sent us her recipe, and I was at Chabad there, she came with her 2 children, and as she said to me, my 5 delicious grandchildren. She reminded us this: our family's table is getting full again. The beauty of our books, these are the survivors. Their stories that they're sharing with us and their pictures that are included are then again of beautiful families. Do you know, we went back to each of our contributor. We wanted to make sure that our stories were brought to life for the children that would never have met a survivor. So we have pictures of them at wartime. And just like the recipe, we didn't touch it up. Here's my father in the ghetto, and you can't even see his face, but we printed it in our book. And here I am today in a beautiful simcha, a wedding, an anniversary, a bar, a bat mitzvah. Our cookbooks are being sold all over the world. The original is on sale at the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., where it's their #1 best-selling hardback book. We made our books into a world mitzvah project, and as you heard the rabbi say, my family is giving every penny to that Karma Hire soup kitchen that I walked into on my first trip to Israel. For Rosh Hashanah, my family gave them a donation which brought our total contribution to over $170,000 just from all of those people around the world who have purchased our book. Do you know, when I was there last year, they told me without our book sales, their soup kitchens would have closed. And we just found out for the new year, the other soup kitchen in Jerusalem did close, and now they're going to be feeding, instead of 500, 1,000 people a day. When I was there, we were invited to City Hall to meet with Jerusalem Nir Barkat, and he had me sign a book. You'll see it in Miracles and Meals. But he asked me as I toured the world to deliver this message to you, and this is from him. Thank you for your support of Israel. Thank you for being a part of this beautiful World Mitzvah project that feeds hungry people in 2012 here in Israel. Do you know, we decided to make our project, as it is $36, 2 times high, that every town and city that I've been invited to, that we would leave a fundraiser for you. By doing that, we have been able to raise $600,000 for all the Jewish organizations that I've been invited to, which brings our grand total to over $800,000 have been raised for Jewish charities from our 2 cookbooks. Do you know we are just 12,000 books away from being sold to raise $1 million for Jewish organizations? And it's only sold in groups like this. It's so incredible. But do you know, there's been other miracles that have happened since the project started the last 4 years. I want to share just a few of these so you can see the power of this project and the goodness, the mitzvah, the tikkun olam that this is doing, truly repairing of the world. One young girl got our book, and she is from Atlanta, Georgia. She was 12 years old. She's going to use the book as a bat mitzvah project. She sold 100 books. She took half to her food bank there, and her mother took her to Karma Hire Soup Kitchen in the summer, where she peeled carrots and potatoes and saw that the money that she was bringing was really feeding people. She became so inspired with this book. She went back to her school and said, look, how about if in my area we interview the survivors? So they found 11 survivors, 11 students, and they said, we heard Joanne's doing her second book. Well, I said, what I need is her story, the recipe, wartime pictures, and pictures of them today. With these smart children, what did they do? They did all of that plus this. They asked each survivor, what message do you want to leave in the world? And each one put that in. 11 of those are in our book. Well, if that wasn't enough, we flew out and gave them all certificates. But this May, when we launched Miracles and Meals, do you know who was at that soup kitchen with me? Oh, it was the Jerusalem Post. It was the main rabbi from the Wailing Wall. It was those from the Knesset and the Prime Minister's cabinet. But who was it with me? Those young children from that Epstein school were there with me as we launched that book. It was so powerful. We had another young girl that I'm equally as proud of that wasn't going to have a bat mitzvah. And the Rebbetzin kept bringing her in, trying this and that, and her mother just said, look, she doesn't want to have one. And the Rebbetzin said, give me one last chance. Let me let her look at this book and see if she'd like to take part in this project. And she had her bat mitzvah. That alone is such an incredible miracle. As we've traveled around, we've met incredible people. People that bought our book, went to Israel now, and do you know, they made large donations. A man that found his mother's apple cake after she died, he thought he'd never find that recipe again. It was in our book. Another couple from England called me. She said, it was like 2 years after she bought the book. She said, I just want you to know, do you know we go every year to Israel? Twice a year, actually, and we fill the freezer with meats before we leave. But I want to tell you what happened in Naples, Florida, for you to see the impact of one book, because you don't know when you get this book home what might happen with you. I was speaking at the Naples Holocaust Museum the Naples Holocaust Museum in Florida. And I spoke in the morning and then I spoke at night. So after I finished speaking in the morning, someone called this teacher from Pine Ridge Middle School. They had had an incident, you might have heard of it. Children thought they were being funny. They called it an Irish Day, an Italian Day. Well, it was 2009. They called it Kick a Jew Day. And of course, those children were in trouble. But more importantly, the community knew they needed to do something. So this teacher came and heard me speak. Only thing I knew, she bought a book, I signed a book, she took the book home. What do I know? She went to her teachers, the principal, the Board of Education, with the Holocaust Museum, developed a program to teach Holocaust studies and tolerance for their students. Then she went to the grocery store. They gave them a grant for 120 books, plus all the food. And each child in that school picked a survivor out of the book, just like I did, telling the story as if they were them. Do you know, my husband and I have been there. 700 students have gone through this program. And we're touching them and changing them. As they told the story, they served the recipe. And I went back and I said to them, please let my family have this program so that anyone in the world can use it. We have this free teacher's guide for anyone. Just email me. It's all electronical now. Everything, all the information, which would be loved because it comes from the museum. What's Crystal Knot? When did it start in Russia? And they did all the research on each country. What an incredible thing to happen with just one person in this project. And then you heard when I was in California, I was interviewed on JLTV, and I said to him, look, will you give me a chance? I could be the Jewish Rachel Ray, but with such a purpose. And do you know, the next day, after my interview, they called me with a contract for 22 episodes. And what do? All over the world, this is what I'm asking of families. This is the project. Make one recipe. Tell the story. I'm telling you, it is so powerful. And I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to really do it. And do you know what my show is? Every week, I make the 2 recipes and tell the stories. So I'm hoping that I'll get someone that would sponsor me so I could do 5 years. That would be over 100 stories left to the world, to the children that might not ever meet a survivor. And this summer, I have to tell you one last thing. I found a camp and I said, look, if you would take this project on, we would pick 3 stories and let these young girls at the Jewish Girls Retreat Camp in Albany, New York, make a movie. So they made all the clothes, and that school, the Sage College, had part of its campus, old mansions, you know, where they put like the French students and this, where they let us use those buildings. And we reenacted the story of the children. Bronnie First's story in the orphanage, they're in that building. And I'm telling you, the students acting it out is so very powerful. So now I come down to how do I ask you to become ambassadors with me? Do you know, 90 cities sounds like a lot, but my goal, and I know you'll agree with me, can only be that 6 million in the world have our book and fulfill the mitzvah of making the recipe and sharing the story at our table. And through social networking today, you can help me reach all of those people all over the world. And if you need someone to have a speaker, I don't charge a speaker's fee. I come and share my mitzvah project because my goal is so crystal clear in my mind that this isn't my project. This is our generation's gift to children we will never know. My name isn't on that book. It says it is collected from the Caras family. And that was by encouragement these last time to put our name even on there. But I want you to know that this is a project from all of us. I'd like to end my speech today by reading a poem. This is a poem that was written for Ruthie Kessler. When she was just 5 years old, she was put on the kinder transport. It's a beautiful poem. It's called All Alone. So please, before I start this, think of those that you'd like to buy this incredible book or this incredible collection of both books for yourself, for your children, for a wedding, for an anniversary. As a gift, I'm telling you, I get letters and emails of people that said to me, it's the most wonderful gift they've ever been given. This is Ruthie Kessler's reflecting on when she was just 5. It's called All Alone. A scene at the train station I vividly recall, waving goodbye to one and to all. I look at my family only to see my mother, she's hiding her tears from me. Would I see them soon? There was no reply. Just a hope for a little child of just 5. As I boarded the train, I wished and I prayed we'd all be together in just a few short days. Arriving in London, I was quickly approached by a family of 4 that would be my coach. They wanted to show me the ins and the outs of hiding, of gas masks, when bombs were about. Letters from home were not really great. I found out through the mail my dear family's fate. My father was able to get to the States, hoping we'd join him without a long wait. My mother, my sister, were not as lucky as he. They were sent to a concentration camp. No, they would never be free. Their letters stopped coming, and before very long, I knew in my heart most of my family was gone. Thank you, everyone. May God bless you. And my mother at 17 put me on a boat to America. Little did this mother know that he would be the only one to survive. 60 family members of my husband's family were killed at Babi Yar. And here I was pregnant And I'm thinking of this mother that had given her child up, put him on a boat, and he would be the only living legacy of their family. And I made a promise to Zadie then and there that my children and I would always remember those that were lost and those that were able to survive. So now let me take you up to 2005. That young baby that was inside, his name was Jonathan. He was getting married to his beautiful wife, Sarah. And off they would go with backpacks to Israel as they were making Aliyah, 7 days after being married. So my husband and I gave him some money, and I said to him, I'll see you during Passover. I wanted them to have a chance to get into school, to learn the language. And as I went over to visit him,
speaker for tonight, which I had the privilege to meet just moments ago. Joanne Caras is the star of a weekly cooking show on Monday nights called Miracles and Meals. The show appears on Monday evening at 9 p.m. on JLTV all over the United States and in 116 countries. For the past several years, Joanne has worked tirelessly to create and promote the Holocaust Survivor Cookbook. After collecting 129 stories and over 250 recipes from Holocaust survivors from all over the world, she has appeared on Fox TV, CBS, NBC, ABC, Israeli national TV, and national radio in the US, Canada, and Israel. Joanne has given over 250 speeches all across the world, including Canada, Mexico, England, Israel, Denmark, Switzerland, and Italy. Her second book, Miracles and Meals, contains 115 new stories and over 200 more recipes. Joanne and her husband, Harvey, have been married for 30 years. They live in Florida. The couple donates all of the profits from every cookbook sold to Jewish charities. Their largest donations have gone to the Karmei Ear Soup Kitchen in Jerusalem, which feeds over 500 hungry Israelis every day. Her son Jonathan, her daughter-in-law Sarah, her granddaughter Zava, and grandson Shalom live in Jerusalem. Her son Michael is a Chabad rabbi who lives in New York with his wife Leah and their daughter Chaya. And her daughter Rachel lives in St. Louis with her husband Dan. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Joanne Caras.
Malky, I want to thank you. I think you're all the way in the back there for making my dream come true, to bring me here, and I certainly appreciate it. I want to also thank those who took part in making this evening event, the Holocaust Museum, those who did the cooking. But I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening, giving me a chance to tell you my story. The story of a woman's trip to Israel would turn out to create 2 books, the Holocaust Survivor Cookbook and our new book, Miracles and Meals, and would have her own TV show.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, as you know, this is an event presented by the Jewish Academy. The Jewish Academy, as you know, is the newly launched, highly professional and innovative program providing top quality education for adults of all backgrounds. This program is co-sponsored tonight by the Jewish Learning Institute from Chabad of Richmond. It's also co-sponsored by a wonderful organization here in Vancouver, the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center. As well, I'd like to welcome the president of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, Mr. Ed Lewin. And I'd like to invite them to light a candle in the memory of the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust. I'd like to introduce our...
You are part of my 90-city world speaking tour this year. Thank you for letting me tell you my story. Do you know, as I travel all over the world, people ask me, how did this happen to you? How is it that this woman who never wrote a book before would end up with the #1 book at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. and have a World Mitzvah project? So let me take you back to where it all started. It was 1982. I met and married my adorable husband, Harvey. And shortly after marrying him, we realized that I was pregnant. And he said, let's fly to Boston to share the fabulous news with my family. And when we got there, he said, my Zadie, who's in a nursing home, has been expecting us. He can't wait for you to tell him. And as I told Zadie that I was pregnant and that he would be having another great-grandchild, Zadie would tell me something that would stick with me my whole entire life. He said, when I was 17, I lived in Russia, and the Russian army was coming, and they were taking the young Jewish boys